What's up, y'all? This is Alex from the Rim Review, and we've reached a time in the year where it is now the point where we are going to release our big board for this upcoming draft, which will actually occur tomorrow. A few quick notes before we get into the big board are, first off, I have watched basically every single player that I'm going to be discussing in today's big board. For the players that I have not posted, my team that I work for has either played against them or I have watched them on my own. However, I have just simply not posted a video on them yet. For the people that I have not posted a video on, I will get a video on them after the draft, so every single take is going to have a very similar level of attention to detail that you have seen in my previous videos. If there's a player that I have not watched as much of, I will make sure to note that before I discuss that player, so you can take what I say with a little bit of a grain of salt. But I've watched everybody, and so I have a good idea of what I'm saying. Now, let's start it off and discuss who I think the first overall pick should be, and that's Alex Sarr, the French big man who played in the NBL. When looking at Sarr's offense, a couple strengths that I think are going to jump off the page really quickly are his transition abilities to score. With 1.42 points per possession, Sarr showcases some really great and exciting flashes of putting the ball on the floor and creating for others. He also is really great in dribble handoff situations and has shown flashes of short roll passing and overall pick and roll scoring and just being an option there. There's still some weaknesses such as his inconsistent shot, only shooting 28.7% from beyond the line. However, it has looked better in workouts, and with NBA shooting coaches, I think he can improve. Another concern is his loose handle with a 0.97 assist to turnover ratio. However, as I mentioned earlier, these are things that will improve with time. In my opinion, he's one of the two unicorn prospects in this draft, and we'll get to the second one later. Defensively, he's a next level monster. He can protect the rim, 1.5 blocks a game. He can play drop coverage, he can switch, he can blitz, he can do it all in the pick and roll and in driving line situations. He is very elite. My only concern with him defensively is the fact that sometimes he's a little overly aggressive trying to make things happen. When it comes to what his career could be like in the NBA, I see no world in which he is not a starter and a major contributing piece, and I think his floor is someone that still has a long career, is a really great fringe starter, good backup role, but I do think he has all-star level potential. Now let's move on to my second player on this big board, which I will admit is a controversial one, Matas Buzelis. He, in my opinion, is the second unicorn player in this draft, and here's what I like about him. He shows flashes of being able to handle the basketball as a straight line driver. He's a smart player as he has a really nice job cutting. He has great touch around the rim, while he does struggle with physicality. Now, here are some of the questions that people hold to him. The first of which is, even though he is 6'10", he is rarely used as a screener, and when he does set it, it's not physical at all. I will give them that point. One thing that I will debate though is his inconsistent shot. He shot 27% last season from beyond the arc in the three-point line in the G League. However, in the last month of the season, month and a half, he shot 41%, and in EYBL, he shot high from three as well. I buy that with NBA shooting coaches, he's going to be able to work and develop that skill. I also buy that he's going to be able to put on more weight and physicality because that's just what happens when you have NBA level coaching. In my personal opinion, Ignite, particularly last year, did not do the best job at developing their players, so I'm not going to hold that against the prospects who did not have the same year to develop as some of the other players with maybe a better system around them had. And one other weakness is his ability to protect the basketball, but that's another thing that I think can be coached out of him. For me, I see 6'10", I see someone that's smart, and I see flashes of handling, straight line driving, and I buy his shot, which maybe I'm crazy for, but I do think that that's something that can happen. And what I really love about him is his defense. He's extremely switchable, he got 1.8 blocks per game, and he's very aware off the ball. Once again, I think he's a very smart player, and I think he does a lot of things at a high level. As far as his weaknesses defensively, he struggles bullying through a ball screen, but so does every other kid in this class almost. And he does struggle with physical bigs, but you can play him as a 4, and in this small ball era, it's not that much of an issue. I do think that there are more weaknesses for his game than Sarr, and I will concede that he is 100% a risk, but I do think he's a risk worth taking, and for me, I see him becoming a player such as Scotty Barnes if he hits that potential, and I don't think there are many other players in this class that have that level level of ceiling of being an actual all-star caliber player, and I think it's worth, if you're at the top of this draft, taking a shot. Now, let's move on to the third player, which I will also admit is controversial, Zachary Risacher. I know that most mocks have him as the #1 overall pick, and I will concede that that's probably what's going to happen. The reason why I don't have him as #1 or 2 is a variety of reasons. The first of which is his height. I'd rather take the extra 1.5 inches with going for a player like Matas. When looking at Risacher's strengths though, his shooting is obviously his #1 strength. He shot 39.7% from beyond the arc, and these were not gimme threes. He was playing in a professional league overseas, he relocated well and looked like a smart player, and he combined those relocations with great cutting with 1.295 points per possession. He also shows flashes of being okay in transition. Unfortunately for me, here are the 3 issues that made him worse than Matas in my eyes offensively. The first of which is the fact that I really believed he struggled to attack closeouts. A lot of times his first instinct when it comes to attacking closeouts is to have a sidestep 3 or take a more difficult shot. He only shot 27.5% from 2s on spot-ups, which tells me that he struggles to get to the rim on a straight line drive. Secondly, he struggles to protect the ball and had a 0.62 assist to turnover ratio. His handle is loose, and I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid that says he's going to be able to develop a ball handle that a lot of scouts do. Finally, he was rarely used as a screener, only 2 times, which makes me think he's not going to be a pick and pop guy. Defensively, he's next level, great driving line defender, he's aware, good length, and there's nothing wrong I can say about that. I think he can be a really amazing 3-and-D guy, and I think he'll be a starter in the NBA for a long time. I love the Michael Porter Jr. comp with defense that every single scout has said. I think that's extremely accurate. However, in my eyes, I'd rather take the potential of a guy like Matas or Sarr, but I still think Risacher is extremely talented. With my 4th player on this big board, I have the 6'6" guard from the Adriatic League, Nikola Topic. When looking at Nikola Topic's game, I see some player who is going to be able to create for others, play with speed, and have great length. With 1.326 points per possession in transition and a 2.21 assist to turnover ratio, Topic is elite when it comes to getting others involved. He also has electric touch around the rim where he's able to change pace and finish in the 86th percentile with at-rim finishes. Topic is creative and honestly fun to watch. A lot of scouts are very concerned with his shooting, as he only shot 30.5% from beyond the arc, and I will admit, his shot does not look good. However, he shot off the dribble, he shot actually a lot better, and that was the majority of his attempts. So his shot percentage is going to be brought down simply due to the fact that he's taking lesser shots. In the NBA, he's not going to be taking these tough off-the-dribble threes, and he's going to get shots that are much more in rhythm because he's going to have a lot more help around him. Uros Plasvic was one of the highest scorers in his league, so he didn't have the most competition, so he took bad shots. I also think that he could become better at being more physical and handling contact, but that will come with time. Now let's talk about him defensively, which I am a little scared on. But I do think he has a really nice job talking, rotating, and he has a good frame. So I think it can be coached, but at the moment it's really poor. He's not a good driving line defender, he's not always engaged, and he struggles to navigate screens. Finally, I'll address the elephant in the room, which is his partial ACL tear. Here's why that doesn't worry me. The first thing with this is the fact that it is a partial tear that he's expected to fully recover from. Secondly, I actually like the fact that he had a partial ACL tear when he played it throughout the entire season, because this means the defensive weaknesses where I was worried about him being slow, he was slow while playing on a torn ACL. So if he gets this ACL fixed and fully recovers, his defensive speed could be to a level that I have not seen before, which makes me actually believe in him even more. I think he could be Josh Giddey plus offensively and a little worse defensively, and to me, that's worth a top 4 pick. Now let's move on to my 5th selection, which is Sheppard. In my personal opinion, you cannot go wrong with Reed Sheppard. He shot 54.3% from 3 last season, which is honestly unheard of. He's also a beast in transition, where he pushes the ball and passes ahead, where he gets 1.62 points per possession, and his pick and roll read ability is next level. With his shot profile, high basketball IQ, and the fact that he's always playing at his own pace and playing off two, he is an extremely exciting prospect. Some weaknesses do include his lack of necessarily off the charts handle. However, he's a very good athlete. Sometimes he does telegraph passes and struggles to handle pressure, but so does every other 19, 20-year-old kid that is going to be in this draft class. I think Reed Sheppard does a lot of things right. And what I really love is his defense. Reed Sheppard had 81 steals last season. He always knows where to go. He's swiping at the ball. He's aggressive. He's competing. And what is an even more mind-boggling number is the fact that despite the fact that he's undersized, he had 23 blocks. That number is next level. He's a great driving line defender, and to me, my main weaknesses is the fact that sometimes he overplays off ball, and sometimes he also may get clipped on some screens. But you know what? That happens to everybody. I think he's a better screen navigator than most players. He's just not perfect. I think with time, he will get there. When looking at what his career could be, a lot of people make a Derek White comp. I completely understand how they get there. However, I think he's a better shooter and honestly a little bit more athletic. And so I think Reed Sheppard could even be better than Derek White. Like, a lot of people say, why can't he be Derek White? My question to you is, why can't he be better? Now let's discuss Stephon Castle, who I think is going to be a really great option as the 6th best player in this draft class. When looking at Castle offensively, he is able to get to the rim at will. He plays off of 2 feet, and when it comes in clutch, he's going to cut, he's going to be smart, and he's going to get downhill. While he's not always the best straight line driver, when it matters, he showed up, which lets me know that once he's able to get into an NBA building, they're going to develop that out of him. He's also a very talented passer with a 1.98 assist to turnover ratio. However, I do put a little bit of an asterisk next to that number because when you played at UConn, you are going to have good numbers no matter what. Now, there are a couple weaknesses, and the number one for me is his shooting at 26% from 3. For me, I'm more concerned with his shooting than a player like Montas, and I just don't spy that Stephon Castle is going to be able to develop a shot as much. I think maybe there's a world in which he becomes like a 33% three-point shooter, but I think he's going to be on the low end, where I could see a player such as Montas more likely than not hit that number and probably get to 35% with time. I also think he was really bad at attacking closeouts when guys dropped against him. So if a team were to pack the paint and stay in the gaps, I saw Castle settle far too many times. However, I do think he may be the best guard defender in this draft, and he might be the best defender in general outside of a player like Ryan Dunn, who we'll discuss later. He only gave up 0.579 points per possession in driving line. He's amazing at navigating screens, only giving up 0.5 points per possession in the screen. He always remains vertical and plays with effort. When looking at what his career could be like, I could see him as a pure starter, kind of 4th, 5th option offensively, that is your best defender. You're going to put him on the other team's best player every night. He's going to compete. He's going to leave it all out there. And worst case scenario, I think he's a 7th or 8th man that you're able to keep on your bench, sub him in for defensive situations that still contributes positively. I think he could be a really great find at 6. Now, we've finally gotten to Donovan Clingan, which I know a lot of you probably thought would have gone a bit earlier. A quick disclaimer about Donovan Clingan: I know he has been doing amazing at private workouts recently. However, I am not able to attend these workouts, so when I am judging who he is as a player, more often than not, I'm going to rely on the film that I saw, and the film that I saw has me put him at 7. Here's why. Firstly, with his offensive strengths, I think he does an amazing job hunting for the ball in rim running. In transition, that's going to allow him to get easy buckets, and that's how he's going to score in the NBA. He's also a very talented screener, and I think he sets screens with a really good angle, making it difficult for guards to go under against a ball screen with him, and I think he always makes contact. One thing that I will disagree with when it comes to screening is the fact that many scouts view him as a lob threat because of his size and wingspan. I would disagree with that a bit because I just don't simply think he's able to jump high enough to make some of the major plays that lob threats are doing in the NBA. I think, yes, when LaMelo Ball or somebody like even Nikola Topic is throwing him a lob pass, or a Trey Jones even, a talented guard that's a good passer is throwing a lob, yes, I think he's going to get a lob. But when it is Devontae Graham, or even if it's a player like a Herb Jones maybe in a particular action throwing him a lob, I don't think he's going to have the catch radius that a player like a Derek Lively would have on the Mavs, who's able to almost hide some bad passes that players throw. I think he needs a good pass to be a lob threat, and for me, I'm not going to count that. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, here's what concerns me. The first of which, and the most important thing, is his touch. I honestly just don't think he's strong enough, and I've seen time after time again him get great positioning and simply not finish. I know that he has been able to do that a lot, and people say in private workouts the touch is better. I just don't buy it. Another thing that is a really big concern is his short roll playmaking. Even if he is a really good lob threat, he's not able to pass well out of the short roll, so it makes him not that much of a pick and roll man threat because people are going to blitz the ball screen or put a hard hedge on him, and you don't have to worry about him getting the ball and passing. Once again, I'll compare him to Derek Lively, who's able to get the ball in the short roll and kick immediately to the corner, which is why teams were unable to blitz Luka, and that's also Luka is just Luka, but that contributed to that being a thing, and I don't think you have that with Klingan. Finally, I'll touch on the shooting piece. He only shot 59% from the free throw line, so until I see it on the court, I'm not buying these rumors that he's draining threes in workouts. Finally, I know we've been talking about Klingan for a while. He's a really solid defender. He has a 14% block rate, which is really amazing. He's great at defending the post, and he is the definition of drop coverage bigs. I think that's really great, and I love seeing that happen. One thing that does concern me a little bit is the fact that you can't switch him, but that isn't really the end of the world. And once again, a lot of people say Rudy Gobert with him, and you can't switch Gobert. Overall, when looking at what Klingan is going to be in his career, I think he's going to be a really solid center that is going to be an option for you to play, and I think you're going to start him consistently. However, I don't think he'll ever reach the superstar potential and the Rudy Gobert hype that people say because of the concerns that I mentioned earlier. Now, let's move on to the 8th best player in this draft, which is Ron Holland, which I am also a little higher on. Here's why I like him. I love his ability to push in transition, get the ball, go coast to coast, and really be an explosive athlete. That's really exciting. I also think that he's a really strong driver, especially in straight line situations. He does overly rely on going right, and another concern with him is the fact that oftentimes he will make one move and go, and he doesn't always have a counter. However, with his athleticism, he is such an intriguing and fascinating prospect. There's still some weaknesses that concern me, and once again, it's the shooting. I also don't buy the argument that Ron Holland could develop a shot, as at 25%, I think his shot looked the clunkiest of Buzelis, Castle, and him. I don't think his shot is great, however, I do think he's going to be able to make up for it when he learns to attack closeouts better. He had a really poor attacking closeout decision making. I'm not going to hold that against him. I think G League Ignite this year was not the most well-run program and not as well-run as it was in the past. So I think because he didn't have that level of coaching with him, he wasn't able to develop those skills. So I'm giving the Ignite guys a little bit of a pass there. And I think that he's going to be able to become a better playmaker once again when he's in an NBA system. But here's what people are going to love about him. Ron Holland competes and loves basketball. He gave up 0.375 points per possession in driving line defense. That number is insane. He was playing against professionals and he was able to shut them down. He's going to compete defensively, and there's no way he doesn't bring a good presence to your locker room. With 2.4 steals per game, he is the definition of a high motor guy. When it comes to his weaknesses, I do think he could work on his footwork and closeouts, and I also think he could have a higher point of contact. But these are little things, these are not major defensive weaknesses, and these tweaks can be fixed very easily. When looking at what his career could be, I like a theoretical Jonathan Kuminga style player. He's a wing that can guard 1 through 4, and honestly you could put him on the 5 and be okay. He's going to be able to compete, and he's going to be able to handle the ball offensively. I don't buy the shooting, which is why I have him a little lower, but I like Ron Holland. Now let's move on to the first video we posted on this channel, and at 9 I have Cody Williams. Here's what I like about Cody Williams. I think his cutting is next level. He's extremely intelligent and has 1.48 points per possession. He also is beyond efficient for a freshman. Secondly, he does an awesome job pushing in transition, showcasing those flashes of handles, and he knows how to use his size. There are still some weaknesses, and those are weaknesses that a lot of freshmen go through. For example, he struggles to finish through contact, which a lot of players do. I also don't think he's the next level explosive athlete that you would like to see with a top 10 pick, and his passing could be improved. I will say he's probably slightly overvalued because of the success of his brother, but if you'd asked me this question a month ago, I would have said he was extremely overvalued, and I've kind of came back to liking him a little bit more, and I think he could have a really good career, and I think his length is really promising. When looking at him defensively, there's a lot that he has to work on, but I like his driving line defense. There are obviously going to be times where he's lazy or makes a mistake or is disengaged, but what 19-year-old isn't? There are very few guys that are locked in from the start, and Cody Williams has shown flashes of being really exciting. I also love the potential to use his length in the gaps and in switching scenarios. I still think he needs to get much better at navigating screens, being good in the closeout, and just paying general attention off ball. When looking at how his career is going to go, I do think he's going to have a tough time adjusting in his first year. But if after a year, if he spends maybe a touch of time in the G League, there's no reason in my mind why he can't become a better Jaden McDaniels. When talking about his shooting, a lot of people are lower on his shooting because it doesn't look amazing. It doesn't look bad, but it definitely doesn't look amazing, and he didn't shoot that much. But when he did shoot, he almost shot 40%, which is really exciting. Overall, I think he can have a really nice career as a solid starter or really high quality role player. I don't think he has that superstar potential that a lot of people see in him, but I have no qualms about him having a long career in the NBA. Now let's move on to what, in my opinion, is a top 10 player in this draft, and I have Jared McCain. As I've mentioned in the past, I do work with Jared McCain and Kyle Filipowski, so I'm unable to really disclose much information and go into detail on them. However, I think Jared is a top 10 pick and he's going to have an awesome career in the NBA. Now let's move into the 11th pick, and I do want to say I think after the top 10 there is a little bit of a drop off in prospects, but not drastically. At 11, I have Tidjane Salaun, and here's why. First of which, I think he's a really solid shooter, as over 50% of his shots were from beyond the arc. He shot off movement, his shot looked good, and he is a big guy. He's got great length, and I love seeing that shooting from him. He's also extremely intelligent as a cutter, getting 1.286 points per possession. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, however, he has a lot to work on. He is extremely raw as he struggles to protect the basketball with a 0.65 assist to turnover ratio, is a poor finisher, 26th percentile on layups, doesn't really know how to attack closeouts yet, struggles to create his own shot, and is almost never used as a screener despite having good size. All of this lets me know he is a project and an undertaking. I think that he actually has, to a certain extent, because I do like his defense, similar traits to Zachary Risacher. However, he's so much more of a project and is definitely not NBA ready yet. However, I would love to see him go to a team such as Oklahoma City that has the time, has the resources, and can develop and invest in him, because I do think he has the ceiling to be a really quality starter in the NBA. However, I also think he has a floor in which he could get washed out. Quickly on his defense, he's got great length, remains vertical, and is a solid driving line defender. Overall, I think he's very much a boom or bust player. However, I don't think you can go wrong taking him at 11. Now, with the 12th pick, I have Devin Carter, which I am a touch lower on than the general consensus. When looking at his strengths, I love the fact that he plays at his own pace and the fact that he plays off of 2 feet. This makes him an extremely intelligent player and is why he finished in the 82nd percentile at the rim. One thing that I am very 50-50 on, and I honestly change my opinion on it, it feels like every day at this point, is how good is his shot actually. I think he shot 37% on a really high clip. However, when watching, I think his release is a bit slower and somewhat clunky. I think that it's going to be tough translating it to the NBA because it's a much faster game and more difficult. At the same time though, he's not going to be asked to do as much in the NBA, and he's going to have more help around him, so maybe he can continue to get that solid, slower shot off, but not bad, because he's going to have more help. It's something that I really am 50-50 on, and I'm still debating, and will probably be debating into the summer league if it's going to translate or if it's not. When looking at his weaknesses, I don't like how he struggles with hard hedges. I would have liked for a type of facilitating style player to have definitely been able to do well against an aggressive hedge or a blitz, and I just didn't see that as much, but he wasn't blitzed that much, so that's the other thing. Another weakness is the fact that while I love his athleticism, obviously 42-inch vertical, great speed, won most of the combine drills, that's very exciting. I actually don't think he does the best of job offensively using that athleticism. I think defensively that's a completely other story, but offensively I actually think he's quite slow with the ball and his handle could get tighter. I think that once he's able to develop that, that could be really exciting, and all of a sudden he's one of the quicker players in the NBA, but I don't think that just yet his handle matches his speed. His handle is good, but it could be better. Defensively, Devin Carter has it all, and he is honestly just a straight glue guy. He has an extremely high motor, only gave up 0.421 points per possession on driving line situations, he's physical, and he's aware off ball. He does all the right things that you would like defensively. I will say he does get clipped a little bit more, and the way Providence coached and played defense, they did have him go under a lot. Finally, he is shorter and he is a bit older than some of the other players on this draft, which I have to hold against him because the room for growth is a little smaller. That being said, I see no reason why Devin Carter isn't a 5th starter on an NBA team that competes defensively and makes everybody better, and if he's not a 5th starter, I have no problem with him being my 6th or 7th man who's able to once again come off the bench, run a second unit, and compete. Devin Carter is a winner and he's going to stay in the NBA for a long time. Now, let's move on to who I have as the 13th best player in this class, Dalton Knecht. When looking at Dalton Knecht offensively, a couple of things are going to jump off of the page. The first of which is his shooting, where he shot 39.4% from beyond the arc, and I think that he's going to be an even better shooter in the NBA because at Tennessee he often had to shoot tough shots coming off of screens, where he ranked in the 96th percentile in college basketball running their floppy series that Tennessee absolutely loves, and he was able to shoot at a very high clip. Secondly, I think that he's a great straight line driver who plays off 2 feet, and the combination of those two things makes him a really amazing instant impact guy. When it comes to his weaknesses offensively, I think his handle and passing could be a touch better, and I think he's average when it comes to scoring in isolation and attacking closeouts, but there's nothing that is uniquely bad about him as an offensive player. When looking at Dalton Knecht defensively, a lot of people talk about him as if he is some kind of cone defensively. However, I think he has a really great athletic ability, and I think just because he doesn't look like an athlete, as most people would say, and most people are like, oh, Dalton Knecht is a cone, when you actually watch the tape, he's a much better defender than you would think, and it shows with his amazing combine speeds. He has good length, can move, and I think he just needs to work on his footwork, and I have no qualms about him being a solid defender in the NBA. When it comes to what I am actually more concerned with him, it is not the on-ball defense I'm concerned with, it's the off-ball defense. I think sometimes he plays on his heels, sometimes he's caught watching the ball, and I think he could get better with that. These are all minor things that I think can be tweaked. However, in my eyes, Dalton Knecht is an average and at times maybe even above average defender, and I think that him being a weak defender is honestly just a myth. When it comes to what I think his role could be in the NBA, everybody says he's going to be day one Max Strus. I still think he needs a little bit more time to develop. I think the NBA game, the spacing is going to be different. The only team in the NBA that really runs floppy is the Warriors, and they're honestly falling out of relevance, to be honest, and so I think that's not going to happen much longer. So he's going to have to learn how to use a different offense, because Rick Barnes and Tennessee are definitely more on the old school side. Not saying that that's bad. It works very well for them. They're very successful, great defensive team, runs a traditional offense, but I do think that Tennessee did not necessarily fully prepare Dalton Knecht for what he's going to see in the NBA. So I think that's going to take time. I think his handle might need a little bit of work, but with that, I think he's going to be a solid role player. I think he has no problem being an 8th or 7th man. Worst case scenario, and I think best case scenario, you're getting someone like a little bit taller or better Max Strus, and that's somebody that can compete. Now let's move on to what I will admit is a controversial take, and at 14 I have Rob Dillingham. I know most scouts have him much higher, and some scouts even has him as a top 5 option. However, I'm not sold yet. When looking at his offensive strengths, Rob Dillingham shot 43.8% from beyond the arc, making tough shots. He also is a much better playmaker than most people would think. A lot of people talk about him as this scorer that can really only create for himself in isolation, but he had a 2 to 1 assist to turnover ratio, which is really good and solid, and I think he's okay in the pick and roll. His handles and shot creation is next level, which is really exciting. However, here are his weaknesses. 39% of all of his shots were marked as contested. That is a really concerning factor, especially in today's NBA. I also think he takes a little too many mid-range shots. I know all of the numbers are going to say, well, he had a really good efficiency from the mid-range, or they're going to point to the fact that Tyrese Maxey actually had worse of shot selection in college. But I think it's really bad to assume that just because another Kentucky guard did it, that's what's going to happen from Rob Dillingham. It took Maxey time, and it took a really big leap, and I think that it is really a bad pressure to put on Rob Dillingham to assume that he can become Tyrese Maxey. I also think there are flashes where he looks a little disengaged offensively, and I think he can take his teammates out of a play with a little bit too much tunnel vision. Defensively though, that's where some real concerns come in. The first of which is he does have a high motor, and I think he wants to compete defensively. From everything I've seen from Rob, he seems like a guy who truly wants to win, and he gets a lot of steals. However, I would honestly only describe his defense as erratic. He's all over the place. Off ball, he'll go to the wrong spot, sometimes he gambles, and honestly, it just seems very difficult to manage, especially in an NBA system. In the NBA, if you can't defend, you're not going to be on the court. That's why when I watch Rob Dillingham, more often than not, instead of thinking of Tyrese Maxey, my thought and my brain goes to a Bones Highland type player who is extremely talented, but is unable to get on the court because of defensive issues and because he's not able to play within a system. He's also really poor in closeouts and gave up 1.26 points per possession on spot ups, which is honestly horrendous. I think that he could be a very talented guard. However, there are some really major red flags for me, and honestly, I can't justify having him any higher than this, and it took a lot of thinking and sitting for me to actually even put him this high to begin with. As far as his career, I think he could be Lou Williams, he could be Tyrese Maxey, but for every Tyrese Maxey, there's a dozen Bones Highlands, and it's just going to take time to see which one is Rob Dillingham. Now let's move on to another player that, to be quite honest with, I have struggled deciding where to put Zach Edey, but for now, I'm going to land on his number, the 15th slot, and here's why. I think his post scoring is honestly obscene. He was in the 100th percentile in all of college basketball when it comes to time spent in the post, and he did that while scoring a very efficient 1.047 points per possession. He's also amazing at getting second chance points with 5.15 offensive rebounds per game. However, I ask you, when is the last back to the basket big really dominated in the NBA, or really even got consistent minutes? And it's a question that is hard to answer. While I love his massive size and strength, I don't know if any of that is really going to compete and help him a ton. What I do love is his pick and roll scoring, where he sets great physical screens, not as good as Donovan Clingan. However, he got 1.537 points per possession, which is really great. I think both him and Clingan are not good athletes. However, they do set good screens, and Edey is actually the bigger of the two, and Edey has much better touch. So those things make me excited. I do think that he has some weaknesses, such as his inability to struggle and score with his left hand, and he's a non-shooter, and he's definitely much more of a non-shooter than a player like Clingan is, and Edey is older, so there's less room for growth, which is another thing you have to consider. But as far as looking at where they are right now, I actually think the two are much closer than much scouts would say. When talking about Zach Edey defensively, that is where he took his biggest leap this year. He has 83 blocks on the season, and he had a little bit over a 7% block rate. That's where the real difference comes in between him and Clingan, where Clingan's was higher around 14. I still think Edey's a really good drop coverage big that has good fundamentals and is able to move and drop. He's also a complete wall in the post, so if you try to post him up, it's not going to end well. When looking at his defensive weaknesses, he doesn't have other type of pick and roll coverages, which may make it hard to keep Edey on the court at the end of the games. When we see a player like Rudy Gobert, who is the best type of center like this in the NBA, he is not able to be at the court at the end of games. So I don't think we're going to expect that for Zach Edey. I also think Zach Edey is more likely to just camp out in the paint, and that's a real question. And finally, a lot of scouts have questioned, is he going to be able to be fast enough to stay in the NBA game? I think he will, and that's why I will take him at 15, where I think he could have a really solid career, very Zubac-esque, be a fifth starter, do all the little things as a center, and have a lot of money paid to you for doing that role. And I think worst case of scenario, you're getting a change of pace big that you put in for 15 minutes a game that is able to contribute off the bench. Now let's move on to 16, where I have Tyler Kolek, which is definitely a touch higher than the consensus. Here's why I like him. First off is his passing with a 2.59 assist to turnover ratio, and some of the reads that he makes. He is the best passer in this draft class, and I think it's really not that close. What I love seeing from him is the fact that he plays at his own pace. He doesn't get rushed by aggressive coverages, he's calm, he's relaxed, and he plays off of 2 feet, which is balanced and fundamentally sound, which is why he's in the 77th percentile on layups. While he doesn't have the shifty handle that a player such as a Rob Dillingham has, I do think that he's really good at handling the ball, and his passing is so much better that for a long period of time, I considered putting Kolek ahead of Dillingham. However, I decided against it. When looking at Kolek's weaknesses, I do think that he struggles with contact, and he extremely has a reliance on ball screens to get open. He only ranked in the 5th percentile on isolation plays, and you're not going to be able to give Kolek space and have him score without it really being a set action or a set ball screen. When looking at Kolek defensively, I think he's a really intriguing prospect. I think he's oftentimes in the right position off the ball, once again going back to his very high basketball IQ and his passing. I also think he competes really hard, and there were a lot of times where I saw him have multiple efforts to make a play. He also knows when to and when not to gamble for steals, which is why he had 48 steals last season. While this is true, at the end of the day, he's simply undersized and not athletic. He was in the bottom third on most combine speed drills and is extremely small. His screen navigation is also inconsistent, especially with refuses. To be quite frank, as much as he's going to compete, he's going to get cooked defensively in the NBA simply because of a lack of athleticism and size. While this is true, I do think his ability to run an offense makes him beyond intriguing as a prospect. I wanted to compare him to a player like Goran Dragic, but I honestly think Kolek may be a better passer. That's how high I am on Tyler Kolek passing, and I think his ability to shoot off the dribble is also a nice plus. When looking at what Kolek's career could be, I am hard-pressed not to say he can be a starter on a contending team, and I actually have him as one of my sleepers in this draft that has all-star level potential. I think worst case scenario with Tyler Kolek, you're getting a really solid backup guard that you can make Just the guy you put in to play 20 minutes a game is a second unit guy and run an offense. But to me, there's no world in which Tyler Kolek is not at least doing something to add to an NBA roster a couple years down the line, and I am leaning much more on him hitting his 90th percentile outcome. Now, let's keep the conversation going on guards, and at number 17, I like Bub Carrington, and here's why. Offensively, he's a very talented passer with a 2.21 assist to turnover ratio. While I don't think he's the same playmaker that someone like a Tyler Kolek is, who I had just previously, I do think that I buy stock in his playmaking. Some people say that his passing was a fluke this year, however, I think he did a nice job making complex and simple reads, which is why I believe in him as a passer. I also think he's a solid handle and does a good job shooting off the dribble, but I don't buy into the camp of people that say he's a bigger Lou Williams. I don't think that, first off, he's not taller. They're the exact same height, maybe a half an inch difference between the two, so I don't really know how that narrative got started, but more importantly, his handle is really not that explosive, and it gets me to what is his red flags, which I will say is his inconsistent explosiveness and tendency to settle. But what is an even more concerning red flag is his catch and shoot shooting, as he was a worse catch and shoot shooter than he was an off the dribble shooter. This is concerning because if he's going to be in a slot like the 2 in the NBA, if he doesn't have the ball in his hands and he's not a spot up threat, what is he doing if he struggles to get to the rim? I think he's good at getting to the rim, but the questions still remain because it was inconsistent. Now let's talk about his defense, where I think there are some green and red flags. Firstly, he's a very competitive defender and is really solid in driving line situations. I also loved seeing him fight through off-ball screens. However, I do think there are times where he's a reactionary defender. I think he plays on his heels a little bit too much, and there were too many stretches where I think he wasn't dictating what the offense does. I think he's young and there's still time to work on this. However, I'd love to see him get more into his man. He also was in the 32nd percentile when it comes to navigating on-ball screens, and he's overly aggressive in the gaps in the 14th percentile. When looking at Carrington, yes, his ceiling is an NBA point guard that can run an offense and score for himself, similar to almost a Lou Williams with passing, maybe is what people say. I don't buy that. In my opinion, I think he's a really solid backup point guard that is going to compete, and I think a better Monte Morris is a way I would describe Bub Carrington. I think that's a much more realistic take, and I think Carrington is a really solid find at 17. Now let's move on to 18, where I have Kel'el Ware, who, to be quite honest, I don't know what to do with. When I look at Kel'el Ware, what I love seeing is the fact that he's a great athlete, a really good lob threat, and can stretch the floor, shooting 42.5% from beyond the arc. He also gets a ton of offensive rebounds. At the same time, despite the fact that he's relatively mobile, he struggles to pass, so he's not a short roll big. The screens he sets are honestly quite poor, so even though he is a pick and pop guy, everybody knows he's going up to split the screen, and I think what makes a really good pick and pop player is somebody who you think maybe could actually set the screen and roll, and honestly, almost every time Kel'el Ware is going to just slip it or have a touch screen or ghost it. He never actually makes contact. I also hated seeing him really struggle to handle pressure and doubles in the post. At the same time, defensively, he's a solid rim protector, and he's able to play in a variety of pick and roll coverages, which is really exciting to see. And there were even times where I liked his driving line defense. At the same time, a really big weakness is firstly his low motor. There have been a lot of concerns, and the fact that these concerns have become public is the fact that people don't know if Kel'el Ware actually likes playing basketball. That's a major concern, and Kel'el Ware is not Jokic. He's not talented enough to where he can just kind of go in and treat it like a day job. There are things you're going to have to work on, and I think you see that defensively, where, to be quite frank, there are times where he's just lazy. Overall, when looking at Ware as a player, I think his ceiling is quite high. A lot of people saying a slightly less physical Miles Turner, and I like that. But at the same time, there's a real chance Kel'el Ware could be washed out of the NBA in 1 to 2 years, which is why it's really hard for me to move him any higher than 18, despite him having a really high ceiling. Now, at 19, let's talk about, in my opinion, one of the more surefire late first round picks, Yves Missi. When looking at Yves Missi offensively, he's a very traditional big who sets great screens and is an awesome lob threat and gets rebounds. That's pretty much it, but he's going to play hard, aggressive, and you're getting a Clint Capella style player, which is really a steal that I think can develop into a really good player. It may take a year or two, but I like Yves Missi. When it comes to his weaknesses, he's not really a good passer with a .31 assist to turnover ratio. He's not a stretch 5, which obviously by the Clint Capella comp is the truth, and he doesn't score in the post. But none of those things are huge if you just have him as a rim running guy. You put him in the G League maybe for a couple of games to develop passing. But honestly, I think if you just have him as a rim run guy, he develops that passing with time. He shot good from the free throw line, so he's not necessarily a horrible shooter, but he's not a stretch 5. I like Yves Missi, and I think offensively he's quite solid. When looking at him defensively, here's what I like. I think he's a really good rim protector with 49 blocks. I think he would have had more blocks, but Baylor was a very offensively focused team. They ran a lot of junk zones this year, so I think he limited his opportunities to get blocks. I also like him in drop coverage, and there were even the flashes of occasional switching. His length and athleticism has me excited as well. When it comes to his defensive weaknesses, I think his hands could get better, and what I mean by that is oftentimes he doesn't have one hand on the ball and one hand on his man. It's typically one or the other, but that's a little thing he can learn. I also think sometimes he struggles sprinting back to recover after drops, so if he's in a deeper drop coverage against a pick and pop big, sometimes he's slow to get back, and that allows for some easier threes. And I think his overall post physicality could improve, but once again, many people don't post in the NBA, so that's not something I'm going to think about too much. I think Yves Missi's ceiling is Clint Capella, which is somebody that's making $100 million to just run, dunk, and play hard. And that's really good. That's a 5th starter. That's somebody that you're going to love to have on a contender. I think that a likely outcome for him is a world in which he's just a change of pace big. And there's nothing wrong with getting a change of pace big at 19, especially in a draft class that is allegedly, according to the media, weaker. I actually think this draft class is quite deep and has some hidden gems. I think that Yves Missi is a really solid player and one of those nice pieces in this class. Now at 20, let's look at who I think is one of the more undervalued players in this draft, Terrence Shannon. A lot of people have overlooked Terrence Shannon because of his alleged off-the-court issues. However, he has now been completely exonerated, so now we have the opportunity to look at him solely as a basketball player. And guess what, folks? He's a pretty darn good basketball player. In the pick and roll, he shot 65% from a true shooting perspective. He's able to probe, he has able to snake ball screens, he makes good reads, and honestly, he gets his. In transition, he has elite speed, which is why he averaged 1.32 points per possession. He's also an extremely high volume 3-point shooter, shooting 36% on 46% of his shots being from 3. When it comes to his weaknesses, he's not very good at hunting for his shot off the ball, which is a actually pretty big concern for me. To put this in perspective, he's probably going to have to play the 2 at times in the NBA, and he doesn't relocate, which means he could slide to become open, but even though he's 24 years old, that's not wired into him yet, so instead of moving to get open, he'll just stand there and take himself out of the play. Secondly, he's a very inconsistent passer. You'll see him make a cross-court skip pass that has you say, wow, how is this guy not a lottery pick? And then the next 2 passes are going to be either not thrown when they're wide open or thrown quite poorly. I also think he suffers from Rob Dillingham syndrome in taking some really bad shots, and he doesn't make them at a high enough rate to justify it. I think he's a good bad shot maker, but a bad shot is a bad shot nonetheless. Now let's talk about Terrence Shannon as a defender. I think he's solid when he goes up against smaller guards, and the reason is he's able to use his length to play. He's also a really good athlete, and I like seeing that because he's able to use his athleticism once again to make up for a lot of defense. I think defense is 60% effort, 20% skill, and 20% athleticism, and he has that athleticism right there. He also rarely loses his man off the ball, which points to him being an engaged defender. While this is true, when he has to guard NBA level players, he was frequently struggled and was honestly beat and at times embarrassed. He also sometimes will overplay actions. He wants it so bad that you have to reel him in a little bit, and he's a touch erratic, and his ball screen navigation is honestly not there yet. These are all things that he can work on, but as I mentioned earlier, he is going to be 24 years old when he's drafted, so how much better does he actually get? That's the real question. I think your best case scenario with getting Terrence Shannon is you're getting a lefty Jordan Clarkson that's a 6-man of the year style player. He's going to be a high volume, off the bench guy that's going to compete. I think once again, his floor could be a Bones Hyland type player, maybe a little taller Bones Hyland. I think it's either more likely than not going to be able to keep Shannon on the floor a little more, but Shannon could get washed out if he doesn't continue to be a bad shot maker or stop taking bad shots, because inevitably he'll probably miss these bad shots, and then it's just taking horrible shots, hurting your team, and being hard to be on the court. At the 21st selection, I have Kyle Filipowski. As I mentioned earlier with Jared, I'm unable to discuss Kyle or Jared as a player, but I think Kyle could be a really nice piece added to any NBA roster, and his talent is honestly extremely high. I'm excited to see him and hopefully look forward to watching him succeed in the pros. Now let's talk about who I have with the 22nd pick, KJ Simpson. While I have not released a video on KJ Simpson, I have watched him and I really like his game. That video will be coming out soon after the draft. I think that KJ Simpson is someone who competes defensively and does an awesome job running an offense. He does all of the little things, and his shooting is what's really exciting, with 43.4% from beyond the arc, and he averaged 19.7 points per game. That's a crazy number when you realize the fact that he's playing with Tristan Da Silva and Cody Williams, as well as some other role pieces such as Edey Lampkin. That makes him a really exciting player. When talking about him offensively, what does concern me a little bit is, to be honest, he's not an amazing athlete and he's a bit undersized. However, there are a lot of undersized guards in this class, and that's not going to make me completely concerned. His shooting is also a newer thing, so that's another thing that scouts are going to have to ask. How much do they love him as a shooter, even though he's been shooting better recently? When I talk about him defensively though, I love how much he competes. He's going to get steals, he's gritty, and he's exactly what you want in a guard. I think that he does a lot of these things that are great, and even though he might not be the best athlete, he wants it and he's going to leave it all out there. To be honest, KJ Simpson is a winner, and I don't see how you don't benefit in some way by bringing him into your locker room. When talking about what KJ Simpson could be long term, I think that KJ Simpson has the potential to be a really amazing backup point guard that you bring in, and it's just a lockdown defender that gets you into your offense. Think about a player such as a George Hill. However, I also could see a world where he even goes beyond that and could become a starter once he's able to continue to create for himself. At the end of the day, I can't disregard almost 20 points a game when you're playing with multiple NBA players. Let's stay in Colorado because that's a really fun place to be, and at 23, I'm going to have Tristan Da Silva, who is also ranked at the same spot as his number of 23. When I'm talking about Tristan Da Silva offensively, a lot of things are going to jump out at you. The first of which is his cutting. With 1.36 points per possession, Tristan Da Silva has a mind for the game. He's also really solid in transition and has post touch with both of his hands. But what really sets him apart is his 39% shooting from beyond the arc. When looking at his weaknesses, I think he could improve at setting harder screens, because I would love to see him develop into a pick and pop player, which he currently isn't, and he also struggles to finish through contact. I think finishing through contact is something he's always going to struggle with, but I do think he can improve on setting better screens. When talking about Da Silva defensively, he's not a great athlete. While that is true, I love his length in driving line situations, I love his footwork, I love his intelligence, and he's good in the gaps, and he remains vertical with 18 blocks last season. I think he makes up for a lot of things, and because he's such a smart and well-coached player, I think he's going to be able to find a way to be a plus defensively despite being slow. When it comes to his weaknesses, I do think he's not the best in the pick and roll, as he does get clipped a lot, and I also think if a team were to want to play him at the 4, he would be undersized and outmatched. There also have been a couple of times where I do think he took a possession off. It's very rare, but it is something that I noticed. When evaluating who Tristan Da Silva could be, I think Tristan Da Silva is Kyle Anderson if his parents taught him how to shoot correctly. And that's a really good 7th man that you can add to an NBA roster that can compete day one. I think he's a slow athlete, but he makes up for it with hard work, effort, and doing the little things. And to me, that's an NBA player worth taking in the top 20s. Now at 24, I'm going to have one of the players that I think I may be overvaluing, but I just really love him, Nikola Djurisic. A lot of mocks have him in the mid-second round, but I think he's worth a first-round pick at 24, and here's why. First of which, he is a really solid passer. While the assist-to-turnover ratio might not have been there, he's able to make all types of reads versus all types of coverages. He's extremely intelligent, and it shows on the basketball court. Secondly, he's really a solid scorer in the pick and roll, and while he may rely on a ball screen to score, when he gets that ball screen, he's a bucket. When it comes to his weaknesses, he is an inconsistent shooter, only shooting 30%. However, the flashes that I've seen, I think his shot looks much better than 30%, and I think he actually could end up with NBA coaching being as high as a 35, maybe if we're even going crazy, 36% shooter. Maybe that's a little bit high, but even if he's a 34% shooter, that's still a really solid number. He's also not great at attacking closeouts, but keep in mind this is a young kid playing in the Adriatic League. There's a lot of room for growth. Finally, he's not the most explosive athlete, but he does a lot of things well, and I like him. When talking about Djurisic on the defensive end, here's what I like. Firstly, I think that he's a really solid driving line defender. He's got good size, a good frame, and good length, and it is why he only gives up 0.824 points per possession in isolation. And what's really interesting is the fact that even though he's really a wing, he projects to be a solid help side rim protector, which is kind of a weird trait. It's kind of gimmicky, but it's nice to have. He does a really awesome job recognizing, oh, a drive is coming here, I'm gonna help and trap the box or remain vertical. And he does all these little things at a really high level, which is super exciting to see, and it's really just promising, and it makes me excited. I think when you're getting just these little perks, it's like a cherry on top of his game. Oh yeah, we have this wing that's gonna block shots every once in a while from the help side. That's just a nice bonus. When talking about his weaknesses, I do think he has a low point of contact, and that, in my opinion, is my biggest red flag. I hate seeing guys who aren't immediately meeting their man high, competing, fighting through ball screens, and he doesn't do that. He's definitely not going to be the type of guy like Ryan Dunn, who we're about to get to, who just blows up a team because of how good he is defensively. And as I mentioned, he's slow, and his off-ball defense is inconsistent, partially due to his willingness to gamble and try to make plays like get those help side blocks. Because he's so focused on that, occasionally he'll lose his man. When looking at his career and what I think he could be in the NBA, I'm taking a shot here and saying he has one of the higher ceilings in this later aspect of the draft. I could see him once again, if all the stars align, becoming a Franz Wagner type player, which is an absolute steal in the late 20s. There's also a world in which he's washed out of the NBA in a year or two, but once you get to this part of the draft, certain teams are willing to take a shot, and I think they should buy stock in Nikola Djurisic. With this next selection, with the 25th pick, why don't we snag the best defender in this draft class in Ryan Dunn? Firstly, let's talk about him offensively, which is a cause for concern. However, I want to start with his strengths first. Firstly, he's an incredible athlete, he runs hard in transition, and he cuts. This leads to him having 1.4 points per possession in transition and 1.31 points per possession on cuts. However, if he's not just going to outrun you, he doesn't do much else offensively. So let's briefly discuss his offensive weaknesses, and trust me, there are many. The first of which is his shooting. He shot 19.4% from three. A lot of people compare him to Herb Jones, but Herb Jones can make an open shot. Ryan Dunn cannot. Secondly, Ryan Dunn really struggles to protect the basketball, where he has a negative assist to turnover ratio. His physicality is poor, he's soft around the rim, and he's not really good being used as a roll man. I think he can be a solid roll man with maybe some touch shots if he works on it with skill, but he really struggles to use contact and score. He also, despite the fact that teams are basically daring him to attack a closeout or daring him to shoot, he doesn't know what to do, and honestly, he looks like he gets frazzled when defenses say, hey, we're not going to care about you and we're going to let you stand wide open in the corner. I wish he could be the type of player that could develop a little bit of a game playing in the dunker spot, but I think with NBA coaching they will. I think he has a lot of offensive weaknesses, but I'm not going to hold them all against him because of the fact that he played with honestly the worst offensive system in college basketball. It's really hard to develop new skills when you're running an offense from the Cold War, and it leads to Ryan Dunn not being able to develop some of these things. However, I will say my number one concern is his shooting, because that's something that should translate whether or not you're playing in UVA's horrible blocker mover motion. When going to his defense, this is why he's going to get drafted, and this is why he is a first-round pick. Firstly, his off-ball awareness is next level. He has 43 steals as a wing. He's just making plays time after time again. What's really impressive, though, is his driving line defense as a wing, giving up only 0.467 points per possession in isolation. It's honestly just amazing. Next, he's great in closeouts too. With 0.787 points per possession given up on spot-ups, he's got a closeout card, he's going to use his great length and a 7'2" wingspan, and he's going to make winning plays. Next, and once again, this is a list. He's used in a variety of different pick and roll coverages, and he only gave up 0.462 points per possession in the pick and roll. He's able to switch, he's able to blitz, he's able to do a hard hedge, he's able to do a soft hedge. I haven't really seen him in much drop, but guess what? I'm going to believe he can do it because he's amazing at that. And what I think is honestly just a really amazing, and this is a cherry on top thing, but I love Ryan Dunn's verticality. This really tells you how smart of a player he is. He had 77 blocks last season, and he had more blocks than fouls. I almost never see that. Just tell yourself that. Ryan Dunn is able to jump up, get 77 blocks on the season, and somehow never get in foul trouble. That is beyond impressive and really is a testament to his work ethic on the defensive end. When you're talking about his weaknesses, maybe one could say, oh, he's a bit jumpy, he's a bit competitive too much, sometimes you gotta reel him in a touch. But honestly, I don't care about that. Give me all of the energy from Ryan Dunn. I love his defense. When talking about Ryan Dunn and what his career could be, a lot of it's going to come down to can he make a wide open catch and shoot three in the corner. And at this moment right now, he can't. And that's going to make it really hard to keep him on the floor, is instead of being Herb Jones, he's Jared Vanderbilt. But Jared Vanderbilt is still a really competitive player that can compete, and I love Dunn's athleticism, and I think that he's going to get minutes no matter where he is because he is so good defensively. I think Ryan Dunn maybe could develop into a starter, and if he had even an average offensive game, we're talking a top 10 pick right here. I love Ryan Dunn's game, and I think he could be a steal in the late first. At 26, let's stay with the boomer bust wings, and let's snag Bobi Klintman from the NBL. Bobi Klintman offensively is really intriguing. Firstly, he was a monster in transition. He has length, athleticism, would get a rebound, go coast to coast, and honestly get you excited. To be honest, the NBL isn't the best league, and I was concerned with his poor combine showing. However, I like his length, I like what I can see from him, and it gets me excited. But what gets me excited to the next level is his three-point shooting. 47% of all of his shots were threes, which is beyond exciting. This is going to allow him to be a very talented prospect and develop into a good player. While this is true, there are some massive red flags. The first of which, he doesn't protect the basketball at all, he makes bad decisions, can't finish through contact, and to be quite honest, is soft. These red flags make him a player that could very easily get washed out of the NBA. When you're talking about Bobi Klintman on the defensive end, I like his potential to switch, I like his help side rim protection, and I like the idea of his length in the gaps. But once again, these are all theoretical things. He hasn't fully developed into any of this yet. We're just looking at what he's shown flashes of. When looking at his weaknesses, I'm really concerned with the fact that he over gambles for steals, is not really aware off ball, and is soft in the post. This once again goes to the idea that Bobi Klintman is not the most physical and NBA ready player. When it comes to what another big weakness is for Bobi Klintman, to be honest, for me, it's attitude. Far often than not, I saw Bobi Klintman complaining to a ref instead of getting back on defense when he could have had an opportunity to stop the ball. Bobi Klintman is not a good enough player to act the way I've seen him act at times on the court. I've never met him, I'm not saying he's a bad person, but I would love to see him be more engaged on the basketball court, because if I'm able to notice it on film, I guarantee you people who are able to actually go to games and people whose job it is to know this, not just me, I'm a college student, are going to see that to a much larger extent. As far as what Bobi Klintman's career could be, I really like a Trevor Ariza ceiling for him, which is a really high ceiling getting in the late first. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is a world in which 1 or 2 years from now, he's not an NBA player and is struggling in somewhere overseas or in the G League. At 27, we're going to have a guy who many of you probably expected to hear earlier, Jakobe Walter. Let's first off look at Jakobe Walter's offensive strengths. The first of which is his shooting, as 57% of all of his shots were threes. He also does a really good job coming off of screens, averaging 1.186 points per possession, and he moves well off the ball. While all of this is true, he only shot 34% from three, which is really not that great for someone who is touted to be an obscene shooter. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he was taking ridiculous shots at Baylor that are really difficult. A lot of people compare him to Malik Monk because they think he's able to dribble a ball at a high level. Don't be fooled by that comparison. He's a lot closer to Duncan Robinson, but not as good as a shooter. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, I think his handle is inconsistent. There are flashes where his handle's really good, but there are flashes where he picks the ball up too early, settles, takes a bad shot, and doesn't play off of 2 feet. And these are all fundamental things that I really struggle to have in a player. When looking at him in the ball screen, he really is not comfortable and only averaged 0.736 points per possession. Now let's talk about Jakobe Walter defensively, which honestly is difficult to even think about. His defensive strength really is that he's a good size and that his combine numbers show that he's a decent athlete. However, to me, there are so many defensive weaknesses. The first of which is the off-ball defense. He's just not really aware and was in the 15th percentile in playing off-ball. You can't do that. Secondly, he's really bad at navigating screens, which I know I've said a lot, but Jakobe Walter is bad to a next level. After that, I think he's overly jumpy in closeouts and is bad in the driving line. And the cherry on top of this is the fact that it does not seem like he's a very good communicator, as I saw multiple messed up peel switches and X-outs that were completely botched. I think that Jakobe Walter has the potential to be better, but honestly, his defensive weaknesses may just be too much for me to buy in. When I think of what his career could be, I think he's going to have to shoot the ball at least 37-38% if he wants to get minutes on an NBA court. I think he'll be able to do that because he's going to be getting much easier shots, but if he continues to shoot the percentage he shot at Baylor, he will be out of the NBA in 2 years. I think that his defense is going to have to improve, and a lot of people are going to point to the fact that players like Chris Middleton didn't look like that good of a defender in college, and they worked up to it once they had NBA level coaching because Walter is an athlete. For me, for every Chris Middleton, there are so many other people that don't work out. I would rather just go with the safer pick and assume that he's not going to work out his defense. Because of that, I think Jakobe Walter, honestly, is going to be a ninth man who you bring in specialty situations as a shooter, and I don't think he's ever going to be a real piece. However, I will credit those that say his ceiling is higher than most of the people we're going to be talking about later. At 28, we have another player who you guys probably expected to hear called earlier, Isaiah Collier. Isaiah Collier was extremely hyped up, and in November was majority mocked to be the first overall pick. And here's why they probably thought that. Firstly, he does an awesome job playing off of 2 feet. He's very muscular, he's strong, he gets his balance, and finishes through contacts. He's also next level in transition, where he averaged 1.2 points per possession. He also has shown the flashes and seems capable of making high-level passes. While this is true, here's why he has fallen. Firstly, I think he's far too loose with the basketball. There are a lot of stretches where he honestly seems disengaged, and I don't know how much of this is the fact that USC had a beyond disappointing season, and how much of this is just him. He also settles a lot in isolation and pick and roll situations, and you know me, if you're taking mid-range shots, I'm low on you. I also just think his shot is inconsistent, and a lot of people look at it, a lot of people will point to a decent combine and say, this is a guy that is a good shooter, but I'm going to point to his film at USC and says, maybe not. I know he had an injury, but I also think we have to evaluate the film post-injury, because who knows if he ever fully recovers. When looking at Isaiah Collier from a defensive perspective, here are some of the things that we're going to think about. I think he's high motor, he has active hands, and he's physical. As I mentioned earlier, he has a good frame, and it makes him a solid defender. While this is true, I think he gives up a lot of refuses because he cheats to a certain extent, and I also think he's honestly became used to bad fundamentals and playing behind his man. He's gotten far too used to being able to play behind his man, poke the ball out, and get a steal at USC, and that's not going to happen at the NBA. When looking at his NBA career, I understand why some people think he's a starting caliber guard. However, to me, I just don't see it. I think he's a really good backup that you're going to have as your eighth man that's going to run your offense and has the potential to be really good. I think if you recognize and you're going to give him that role, that's a nice piece. I just don't fully believe in the Isaiah Collier is a lottery pick or the Isaiah Collier is a top 5 talent take. I just don't see it, and that's my take. At 29, we're going to be looking at the big man out of Dayton, Daron Holmes. Holmes is also one of the few players who I did not post a video on, however I have watched his game and am familiar with how he plays. In my opinion, Daron Holmes is once again an old school style big, and I look at him as just a traditional center, or forward if you want to play him there because he is 6'9". Some people talk about his three-point shooting at 38.6%, however, I just don't see that becoming that big of a piece of his game. I think it'll be a piece, but a small one. I like comparing him to a player such as Derek Favors, who's going to be someone that's going to protect the rim, set physical screens, hustle, and definitely be a below-the-rim style player. And you know what? At 29, if a team that's already a competitor can get him, it makes him a really nice piece. I don't think he's going to change any franchise, but I don't think he's going to hurt you either. And I think he has a really nice career, maybe starting some games occasionally, but really just being a change of pace big, giving you 18 to 28 minutes a game, and then in the playoffs playing closer to 10 to 12. And you know what? You need those types of guys to win a championship. Because if you're a team like the Denver Nuggets, you're not going to be able to rely on Jokic playing that many minutes consistently throughout the season. And so I would love them getting a little bit more depth and adding a player like Daron Holmes. With the last pick in the first round, I'm going to have Oso Ighodaro as the 30th best player available. That may surprise some of you guys, but I'm going to explain to you why. Firstly, when looking at his offensive strengths, the number one thing is the fact that he is an incredible passer. With a 1.74 assist to turnover ratio, Ighodaro gets it done. He makes reads on all type of areas in the court, whether he's setting the screen and making a short roll pass, whether he's making a pass in delay, or if he's in a dribble handoff situation where he does a great job making reads, keeping the ball, turning the corner and kicking, scoring for himself, or just having a physical dribble handoff. He's also able to pass out of the post, which some bigs can't do. Also, when speaking of the post, he finishes with touch over both hands so he can shoot over the right and left shoulder and finish in the 75th percentile in post scoring. He does have some weaknesses as he's a non-shooter. He didn't make any threes. He does tend to settle when he's looking to score for himself in isolation, and I do think he could be stronger and is probably an undersized 5. However, I don't really hold those weaknesses with too much weight because, to be honest, with Oso, you know what you're getting. When looking at Oso defensively, I think he can play in a variety of different pick and roll coverages, which is awesome. I don't love him in a drop, but every other pick and roll coverage, I think he's more than fine. I think he's an extremely intelligent player, and there's flashes of him being a solid driving line defender against wings and against guards. When looking against his weaknesses, I think the number one issue is the fact that he's an undersized center. His switchability is inconsistent, but I've seen flashes, which is exciting. I think he's just undersized as a 5, which is where he's probably going to like to play. I think if you can get him to an already contending team, all of a sudden Oso becomes an awesome piece as an 8th or 9th man added to your roster that just makes your team that much better. With the first pick in the second round, let's snag Tyler Smith at 31, who I think could be a complete steal. And let's go into the reasons why. The first reason is his shooting. Tyler Smith is a really nice pick and pop big, as 21.3% of all possessions were screens, and Tyler Smith shot 36.8% from beyond the arc. He also is a really great athlete and straight line driver, which is really exciting, and he has the tools to be a very talented player. When it comes to Tyler Smith's weaknesses, I think he settles for mid-ranges at a really ridiculously high rate. I think that that's why I moved him out of the first round, because it is a massive red flag. He also misses some open kicks, but that is something to be expected with a younger player. I'm going to give him somewhat of a pass on these mid-range shots because, as I mentioned with Matas and Ron Holland, G League Ignite, to be honest, didn't really police that. One other weakness that I would like to note is the fact that he's very overly reliant on touch shots in the post. Very frequently, he will get hit and immediately throw up a touch shot, begging for a foul rather than remaining physical. Now let's move on and talk about Tyler Smith on the defensive end. I like Tyler Smith, and I think he's a solid driving line defender. He's very switchable and only gave up .788 points per possession in ISO situations. Tyler Smith is also a competitor. He only gave up not many points in the post, and he got 44 blocks as an undersized big. That's really exciting. I do think that the number one weakness is he is too short. I think Tyler Smith is naturally a 4, and I think that's a position he probably would prefer to play. However, I think an NBA team is going to try to force Tyler Smith to play at the 5. He also is not great at talking, and if you're going to be undersized as a big, you need to talk. Finally, I think that Tyler Smith really struggles to play in drop coverage, which is the traditional coverage in the NBA. For him, I think more likely than not, you're going to switch, so it won't be a problem. However, it's something worth noting. I think if Tyler Smith is able to put it all together, we're talking about an absolute steal of a pick. We're talking about Al Horford added to your roster. Not necessarily prime Al Horford, but a little bit better version of the current Al Horford. And that's exciting. An undersized pick and pop big that can really do it all and is kind of a mix between the 4 and the 5. That's really fun and that's exciting. If Tyler Smith doesn't put it all together, we're getting a player who is able to really be a nice piece off the bench and kind of be a different style of change of pace big. Maybe you go from big to small, you go to quick lineup, and you just add more with him. I do think there is a world where Tyler Smith settling and maybe being too short could be too much for a team, so I could see him getting washed, but I would be surprised if that happens. I really like Tyler Smith. At 32, we're going to get to a green room invite, and many people have him as a potential lottery pick, Johnny Furphy. Let's start off and talk about Johnny Furphy's offensive strengths. He's an extremely smart cutter, getting 1.47 points per possession on cuts, and he's a 3-point shooter, with 61% of his shots being threes. Every once in a while, he showcases flashes of being a straight line driver, but honestly, Furphy very rarely puts the ball on the floor. He's going to cut and have catch and shoot threes, and that's pretty much just it. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, he doesn't score in isolation, he's never used in the pick and roll, which I don't mind him not being a pick and roll ball handler, but I would love to see him more as a pick and pop player because he is a little bigger and he can shoot, but he also is not that big relative to what people thought he was going to be. So he's actually, I don't know, he's a good size, but he also was expected to be taller, if that makes sense. So it's a little complicated, but that's why I'm a little low on him there. And his shooting off the dribble is not amazing, only shooting 26% off the bounce. When you're talking about Johnny Furphy's defense, there are a lot of things that you need to consider. The first of which is his length. And that's what a lot of people love. You're getting someone that has good arms, good size. I think he has a 6'8.5" wingspan. Those are all great numbers, and that makes him a solid potential defender. He also is really solid at handling refuses and is aware in the pick and roll. Despite this, I still think he really struggles to fight through off-ball screens. He really loses his man off ball. I think he gets caught ball watching. So those are some two really negative traits, but a lot of young players have that. I'm not going to hold that against him too much. But what I don't love is his lack of switchability. While I think he does showcase handling refuses at a high rate, I saw far too often a team reload against him and attack. I still think he's probably even or a slight plus defensively, but I don't buy the idea that he's some major 3-and-D guy. When I think of what Johnny Furphy is, I think like best case scenario, you're just getting a really solid like 3-and-D, like fifth starter guy, but I don't see that. I think more likely than not, you're getting a taller ninth man that you bring in to shoot, and that's pretty much about it. At 33, we have another player who I have not posted a video on, in Baylor Schierman. While I don't have a Baylor Schierman video posted, I will get one posted after the draft, but more importantly, I've watched Schierman at Creighton, and I've also watched his combine film, which was extremely impressive. When looking at Baylor Schierman, I've heard a lot of different things, but I think most scouts probably have him in the range from 20 to 35, and where I have him at 33 is probably closer to the back end, but I really think that Schierman is talented still, nonetheless. What is going to make you get Baylor Schierman is his shooting. He attempted 8.3 threes per game and shot 38.1% from beyond the arc. He's also a great rebounder with a 14.8 rebounding percentage. Those are the numbers that are going to get you excited, and when you throw along a little bit of assists and a lot of just other scoring and maybe being a straight line driver, that makes you excited. But really, at the end of the day, he's a shooter that can rebound. I think he's a little worse than Johnny Furphy because I don't think he packs the same defensive punch that Furphy has. I also think that Schierman is a touch shorter. By a touch, I mean just a touch. He's also 23.7, which I think is what's really causing him to fall below guys such as Furphy. But I still think he's a really solid piece, and I think when you draft Baylor Schierman, maybe you get somebody that can start for you, but more likely than not, I think you're getting a seventh man that is going to have a really nice career and be a good shooter. If you can shoot and you're long and you hustle, you're going to be in the NBA for a while. And Schierman does show those traits, which is why I like him at 33. At 34, I'm actually going to surprise myself from a couple of days ago. Last week, if you would ask me where I had Kevin McCullough, I would have told you probably somewhere in the 50s. However, after having to literally sit down and say, hey, is this guy better than Kevin McCullough, or is this guy better than Kevin McCullough, I actually have McCullough at 35, and let's get into the reasons why. First of which, I really like his passing. I think he has the opportunity to be a really nice delay player, and I see no reason why he can't be very Bruce Brown-esque. I like his handling transition, and he's an extremely intelligent cutter. I also think people have forgotten about him because of his knee surgery, so he could be undervalued. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, he can't create his own shot. He's slow, he's not that fast, and that's a big issue. I'm also not a believer in the 32.5 three-point shooting mark this season. It was the highest of his 5-year collegiate career, and I just don't believe that it's going to continue in the NBA. However, if he's getting more space in the NBA because he's probably going to be a lesser option on the court, maybe he can shoot 30% from three, and maybe he's not a complete inept shooter offensively. I think if that happens, all of a sudden we're talking about someone that you could maybe sneak into starting lineups, but I think his shot is going to be almost unplayable in the NBA at times, which is why I think he's probably going to be a good backup player. When looking at Kevin McCullough defensively, I'm very torn. But his strengths, firstly, he competes. He's active in the gaps and is a good driving line defender. He does all the little things, which makes me beyond excited. While that is true, he's just honestly a pretty poor athlete coming off a knee surgery. Even though he's trying his best, I am worried that he's going to get beat in the NBA. At the end of the day, when evaluating Kevin McCullar, I like him as a nice 8th man, 7th man on an NBA team that can compete. And honestly, when I looked back at previous drafts, so many guys in this range get washed out, and it's hard for me to see Kevin McCullar getting washed out. Even a player that I mentioned earlier, such as a Johnny Furphy, I could see him getting washed out for a variety of reasons. And for McCullar, it's hard to see that because he does the little things. With the 35th best player in this draft, I'm going to throw another name that you guys may have expected as high as 20 picks ago, Kyshawn George. And let me explain some of my reasonings why. When looking at his offensive strengths, he's a really solid shooter. He shot 40.5% from beyond the arc, and scratch solid, he's an elite shooter. He's got a good form, it's crisp, and it looks good. He's also amazing coming off of dribble handoffs, where he averaged 1.33 points per possession. I also like his decision making. I think he's a smart player that is going to fit well in any offense. While that is true, there are some major weaknesses. The first of which is I don't trust his ability to put the ball on the floor at all. I don't see how he can do that, and I don't think he can dribble to the point where some teams are considering him as a lottery pick. I don't buy that argument. I also think he's an extremely poor athlete, and it leads to him just getting completely blown by and struggling to blow by others. And finally, offensively, he can't deal with contact. He doesn't play on 2, he's soft, he's not physical, and he has a lot of red flags there. So yes, he's tall and can shoot, but what else does he do? He's not really a pick and pop threat because he doesn't like contact. He's not going to put the ball on the floor as a straight line driver because he's not a good athlete, once again struggles with contact, and has a loose handle. So really all he is a smart floor spacer that can shoot. When looking at him defensively, there are even more concerns. Yes, he is a lengthy guy, and he does try. I'm not going to argue on that. 60% of defense is length and is effort, and he has the length to back it up, which is exciting. While this is true, he's so slow, and it's really hard to see him improving his footwork or speed to be a good defender defensively. To be honest, I think a lot of NBA scouts are getting caught up in the fact that Kyshawn George is tall at 6'7" and can shoot well. I really think there's more of those guys in the NBA than a lot of fans and the media realizes. There's a lot more Joe Ingles type players than you think, and I think Kyshawn George is Joe Ingles if things work out. I could also see a world in which he's honestly unplayable because he's such a poor athlete. I think the lottery projections are false, and I just would be shocked if he goes there. And for me, he's an early 2nd round pick. With the 36th best player in this class, I'm going to go with Pacome Dadiet, who is one of the plethora of long shooters that is from France. There's just so many of them this year, it feels like. When looking at his strengths, he's a good cutter, and he shot 36% from beyond the arc, shooting in a professional league and making tough shots off movement. He had 1.415 points per possession on cuts, and he also was occasionally used as a screener, making him a pick and pop threat. However, he turns the ball over extremely high with a 0.65 assist to turnover ratio. He also is extremely bad when it comes to creating separation for himself in isolation and dealing with physicality. He's definitely going to be an off-ball player offensively. When talking about his game on the defensive end, he has good length and has shown flashes of a couple of good driving line possessions. But at the end of the day, there's so many things he still needs to work on, and I don't think these flashes are enough. Yes, he really is a long guy, but that's not going to make you a good defender automatically. He's bad at handling refuses, he's bad at talking, and while he shows flashes of being a good driving line defender, he shows a lot more of being a bad one, and his screen navigation in general just leaves a lot to be desired. Overall, when looking at him as a player, I see the vision where he's a 3-and-D guy you bring off the bench as a 9th or 8th man, but I really do think that's a high ceiling for him. I think he probably spends 3-4 years in the NBA as an 11th man, 2-way guy, bouncing around, but I do think he'll be out of the league soon, but maybe it's worth a shot because that shooting and length is always nice to have. With the 37th pick, we're going to be talking about Jamal Shead. While I haven't posted a video on Jamal Shead, my team has played against him, and I've been able to watch him and get an up-close view of what I think he is as a player. I think Jamal Shead, to be quite honest, is a winner. He is gritty. He's going to pick up full court. He's going to do the little things. He's going to bully a ball screen. He's going to be a pest. He's the type of player that you want on your team and that is going to bring great energy to any organization. While I have him as the 37th best player, I would not be shocked if he goes higher than this. He's one of those guys that you just want to take and want to have in your team, even if he's not as talented as other guys that are available on the floor. When looking at the things that he can do though, I think he's really solid at driving. I think he's a great passer. He's going to get his teammates involved. He's going to run an offense, and he has the makings of a really capable backup guard. And that's really good to see. When I think about his weaknesses, honestly, his main weakness is that he's undersized and that he's not a great shooter. I think he's an okay shooter. He took a decent amount of threes. He took some off the dribble threes. But honestly, in the NBA, people are going to live with him shooting. And sometimes it's hard to live if you are undersized and can't shoot. But if anyone can do it, it's Jamal Shead. And I think he has the potential to be a really good backup point guard for years to come for a contending team. At 38, we're going to go the complete opposite direction of Jamal Shead and pick up a wild card in AJ Johnson. Johnson is 6'4", 19 and a half years old, and he can run. He's extremely fast, he has a great change of pace, and what makes him awesome is him in transition and him refusing the pick and roll. But really, he's raw, didn't get many minutes in the NBL last year. It was mostly garbage time preseason and very few real games he played in, but when he does, he is quick. When looking at his weaknesses, there's a lot he's going to have to overcome. The first of which is his problem of over-dribbling. I think Johnson has learned that he is so quick, so he likes to believe that his athleticism is going to allow him to score, but this causes him to miss a lot of very easy reads. His shooting is also a major red flag at 27% from beyond the arc. But what really concerns me is his ability to finish through contact at the rim, where he ranked at the 11th percentile in college basketball. Sorry, not college basketball, in the NBL. It's very concerning when you see that 11th percentile number because it lets you know that he's unable to decelerate around the rim. It's awesome if you can blow by guys, however, if you're not able to be under control while doing it, it doesn't matter. I think that Johnson is going to be a project that takes time, however, he has some of these natural skills offensively that you just can't teach. When looking at him on the defensive end, once again, he shows flashes of being a good driving line defender and he's a good athlete with good size, but that's about it. When it comes to what he's actually learned, I think he has very poor physicality, he struggles to navigate screens, and has inconsistent awareness. When I'm evaluating Johnson, I think you're once again projecting what you could get. All of a sudden, there's a world in which you could get a starting guard that is extremely fast, that can run an offense if everything works, and maybe he's a good defender. However, there's also the much more likely world in which AJ Johnson is somebody that's a trivia question as who was the 30-something pick in this draft, and he's no longer in the NBA. I think that maybe Johnson carves out a role as a backup point guard, but I see him much more as a boomer bust guy. If he's able to become a backup point guard, that would be great, and I think that would be a really high outcome for him. And I think in that world, he would probably rely on his speed to be a change of pace guy, maybe the 10th man that you give 11 minutes to a game. At 39, we're going to go right back in the other direction and pick up what I think is a very polished product in Ajay MItchell. When looking at Ajay MItchell's offensive strengths, I think he's really solid at a lot of things. He's really good in the pick and roll, where he averages 1.014 points per possession. He also creates for others with a 1.53 assist to turnover ratio, and honestly, if he wasn't playing for a really poor team and a really bad conference, I think it would have been better. But you could also make the argument that his weak competition inflated those numbers. I also think he does a nice job playing at his own pace and not being rushed by aggressive defenders, while also projecting to be a solid transition player, not necessarily because of athleticism, but because of intelligence. When looking at his weaknesses, I do think that there are stretches where he has a tendency to over-dribble. I think that that's something that a lot of guards have, but I hate seeing it from a 22-year-old that you're really supposed to pick as a safer prospect. He also does not shoot much, despite having a good shooting percentage. Only 22% of all of his shots were threes, which lets me know that he doesn't believe in his shot, and because he doesn't believe in it, I'm not going to believe in it either. He also has limited experience playing off of the ball, so despite the fact that he has good size, he doesn't really move much as like a half-court player. So you're gonna have to teach him, hey, we need you drifting here, we need you coming off a flare screen in this direction, we need to teach him how to set up guys, because so much at UC Santa Barbara was just him doing whatever he wants. When looking at him defensively, there's once again a little bit of both. What I like about him is the fact that he's clearly intelligent and he's active in the gaps off ball. This allows him to be at the nail, stop a drive, and get some easy steals. He's also able to be in a position like the MIG, lower towards the rim, where once again, he gets a steal. He also has a really good wingspan, especially for a guard at 6'6" and 0.3 inches. That's exciting. While this is all true, he's not a good athlete. He's slow and finished in the bottom half of the combine. I also think while I like him in the gaps, he does have a tendency to overhelp, which could be a problem. I also think that sometimes his lack of athleticism has led to him having a bad screen navigation where he ranks in the 39th percentile. There are also stretches where honestly I can only describe him as lazy in closeouts. He doesn't run guys off the line and has a low point of contact and just dares them to shoot threes. That's unacceptable at an NBA level, and if you're a 22-year-old coming out of UC Santa Barbara, these are the types of things you need to do correctly. When projecting Ajay MItchell, I think his ceiling is a really good backup guard, but if he continues to have this slow athleticism and makes mistakes such as over-dribbling and not really shooting when he's open, all of a sudden he could get washed out. But I like him as a backup guard, and I do think he's a polished product, but he doesn't have the ceiling that a player like AJ Johnson may have. At 40, it feels like we're playing ping pong and we're going right back to another extremely raw prospect in Trentyn Flowers. Flowers is 6'6.5" and only 19 years old, but honestly, I was a little disappointed after watching him. When looking at his strengths, he does a really nice job pushing in transition and seems to definitely want to go out and run. He's also a good athlete and finished second in the draft in the vertical leap. I also think he could be an okay shooter and even a good shooter, as he shot 39%, however, it was on an extremely limited volume and playing in games that honestly weren't that close. So it's really hard to evaluate his shooting, but I think he could be solid. While that is true, there are some massive weaknesses and red flags. The first of which is his extremely loose handle with a .43 assist to turnover ratio. He's also a horrendous finisher at the rim, finishing in the 15th percentile where he struggles dealing with contact and just playing off of two. He also is really bad at attacking closeouts, and guys often run him off the line and he doesn't know what to do. This once again makes me doubt his shooting at 39%, because if he was truly a shooter, he would have had this as something that was drilled into him. He also cannot run a pick and roll offense. He can call for a screen, but he doesn't really know what to do. I don't know how high his basketball IQ is after watching him play, and he only has .571 points possession average in the pick and roll. When looking at him from a defensive perspective, it's the same thing that I feel like I've said for the past couple of guys. Good size and good flashes, but that's it. I think a lot of the fundamentals, such as his footwork, really need to be improved. I also think his off-ball and on-ball navigation need to be improved. He's going to get clipped by stagger screens and pick and rolls, and it is a big issue. I also think he needs to improve his defensive awareness. When looking at Trentyn Flowers, I think he's going to need at least 1 year on a two-way contract, if not two. If those 2 years go well, all of a sudden we're talking about someone that could maybe be a nice bench piece for a team, that could even be a plug-in starter at the two every once in a while, but more likely than not a seventh man. But it's going to take a couple years to get him to that point, so you're going to have to sacrifice a roster spot and a draft pick to get somebody that is probably 2 years away from doing anything meaningful on an NBA court. At 41, we're finally going to stay in an area and stay with another project in Ulrik Komke. When looking at Komke, he's 6'11", 18 years old, and an incredible athlete. When looking at his strengths, the one thing that I really love seeing is how hard his screens are set. This lets me know that he's physical, a competitor, and honestly, it just makes winning plays. He's also shown the occasional flashes of maybe being a shooter and maybe being able to put the ball on the floor. But I want to emphasize that there is very limited film on him, so I want to once again remind you, maybe he can do one of those two things, but that would be a big win if you could get either shooting or handling. When looking at his weaknesses, this is honestly what I'm going to say first. He struggles to catch the basketball. That's how raw he is. He's still lurking on his catch radius, he doesn't have good hands, and he's the definition of raw. He also doesn't know how to use his size yet, which is going to take time. When it comes to evaluating Ulrich Komke from a defensive perspective, he has really good rim protection. He's a great athlete, and at 6'11", I love to see it. He also moves extremely well for a center, and it's really rare to see this level of movement from an 18-year-old kid who has not played much basketball. He also just has good size and is smart in a closeout situation. There weren't as many times when I saw him run out there where he just looked like he was just running just to run, and everything he did was for a purpose. While that is said, he is still learning where to be. I think it's going to take a lot of time to teach him that, and he also just needs to become more physical. More muscle would be great, and it would allow him to be a better defender in the post. When evaluating Ulrich's game, if you're expecting him to be someone that you can draft and day one he's going to contribute, you're going to be disappointed. If you expect him to be someone that can contribute year two, you're probably going to be disappointed. If you expect him to be someone that you're going to get and stash in the G League for 2 or 3 years, you're also probably going to be disappointed. But in that 10% chance that he hits after 2 or 3 years, you are going to have a steal of the draft with a pick and pop Rob Williams, which is an obscene ceiling. However, his floor could be not an NBA player in a few months. At 42, let's talk about the 18-year-old Cam Christie. When I watch Cam Christie play, I am wowed by his 39.5% shooting percentage. I also love his straight line drives and his ability to come off dribble handoffs. It's these simple things that make him really great, and when you combine that with his awesome length, he's a very intriguing prospect. While this is true, what I hate is his lack of physicality, and he shot 34% on layups. That is layups that he shot less than 50% on, and that number right there makes you extremely concerned. I also hate to see his decision making where he settles coming off of screens and shot 36.4% on spot up twos. That lets me know that he struggles to consistently get to the rim if he's not getting a three. However, while these are issues in the NBA spacing, he's really just going to have to stand in the corner, knock down threes, come off the occasional flare screen, set the occasional hammer screen, and just do little things like that. I also love him being a wing that comes and sets pick and pop plays and slips immediately, and I think that's a nice area of his game that is undervalued. When looking at Christie from a defensive perspective, here are some things that stand out. The first of which is the fact that I think he's a solid driving line defender. It's those little things that are nice to see. You combine that with good length and post verticality, only giving up 0.632 points per possession in the post, and we have a really nice defensive piece on our hands. While this is true, off ball, at times he's disengaged, he struggles to navigate through screens, and is a little below average in closeouts. I don't think any of these things are deal breakers, but I do think they're why he's in my 40s rather than in my 30s. With the 43rd pick, we're going to be going with a jack of all trades prospect in Harrison Ingram. Ingram is a do-it-all guy who shows flashes of shooting, passing, setting screens, and is a really good defender. There's not really a single major flaw in Ingram's game, he just does a lot of things at an above average level. I would say his major flaw is his lack of size, and that is going to make it hard for him to play the 4 in the pros. However, he does have a 7-foot wingspan, which is a nice job hiding his 6'5" frame. Ingram is muscular and is just the type of guy that you are going to want to put on a court. I think he's a winner, and I think he's someone that in the regular season in the NBA is going to demand at least 10 minutes a game as a really nice 10th or 11th guy, maybe even a 9th guy. I don't think, at least when he starts, he's going to be a real key contributor on a championship team or a contender, and the reason behind it is his lack of size, but I think if he develops more skills, he could very easily become a 7th or 8th man on a championship level team. With the 44th pick, we're going to go with an undersized center in Adem Bona, and here's why. What I like to see with Adem Bona is his athleticism and high motor. He's a really good athlete and a great lob threat who is going to devour drop coverage. I love his offensive rebounding, and it's really exciting. In college, he was a back-to-the-basket post scorer. However, I don't think an NBA team is ever really going to use him as that in the pros. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, he can't really pass, he's a non-shooter, and the game that he had at UCLA is not one that translates to the NBA. However, I do think that the flashes of just being a pick-and-roll rim run style guy, that does translate, and I think that's what he's going to have to use to succeed. When looking at him defensively, I love his rim protection, pick and roll defense with a variety of different coverages he can play, and his overall high motor. Obviously, the number one weakness is his size, and I think that was what has a lot of people concerned. When looking at what his career could be, I think he's going to be a change of pace big that comes off the bench and you're going to consistently give 18 to 23 minutes a game to, and is going to make a lot of money and have a long career. Think a player like a Bismack Biyombo, and I could totally see that being the career of Adem Bona. With the 45th pick, I think we're going to go with the guy who I've probably watched the least of out of everyone in this draft class, which is Jaylon Tyson. However, I still feel as if I've seen Jaylon Tyson in games against guys that I've watched, and also just in some combine workouts. And what I see with Jaylon Tyson is at Cal, he was a very high usage player that took inefficient shots and was kind of given the green light. Cal was a pretty horrific team last year, so Jaylon Tyson kind of did whatever he wanted. As far as what his role in the NBA is probably going to be, I feel as if he's just going to be a hustle, gritty guy that you bring in off the bench that is, once again, going to not necessarily get you into your offense, but compete on defense and be a spark plug that can score. And I think that that's an okay piece to have. I don't think that he has the elite six-man upside that a lot of people say. And in my eyes, I think I like him more for the fact that he has good size, is physical, and could potentially just be a type of guard off the bench that can kind of defend to a certain extent. I don't really know what to say about his shot. It looks okay. It doesn't look amazing. It doesn't look bad, though. And I think he could potentially be a really solid backup wing / guard, and I think that that could allow him to be very talented. I think that what would limit him from being talented would just be if he wants to continue to play at the high usage rate that he had in college, and no NBA team is going to give him the keys to that. If he says he wants to have the ball in his hands as much as he did in college, they're going to give him the keys to a trip to the G League. At 46, I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to go with the passing of a player such as Juan Nunez. I love watching Juan Nunez play. I think he's very comfortable in the pick and roll, and I love the fact that he projects to be a really good player in transition. I honestly just like taking a shot on someone that has an obscene basketball IQ. I think his offensive weaknesses that are going to concern people are A, the lack of being able to play through contact, the limited ability to create a shot for himself, and obviously his shooting. However, while these are definitely weaknesses, he is so good at creating for others, and it makes it hard for me to buy a world in which he's not someone that you at least want to keep on a two-way contract for a couple of years because of the fact that he's going to just make your team better and be a great presence. And I could see him developing into an awesome backup guard that even has some really high potential in the second round. I will say his defense, honestly, even though he has active hands with 91 steals last season, he's a cone. He can't move, and he's going to get exposed on that end, and it is going to have a major impact on limiting his minutes. I do see an argument for him struggling to pan out in the NBA and having to go to the Euro League, and I do also buy some of the comps that say he's a player like a Vasily Micic who might need to gain a little bit more maturity and physicality on the offensive end because his defense will never be there. But I think it's worth having a player like Nunez in your roster for at least 2 years on two-way deals to see if he can put something together, because if he does, he could be pretty gosh darn good. As far as like Micic himself, Micic is still a starting point guard for the Hornets for part of the year last year. Granted, they had a lot of injuries, but he looked okay. And so I see no world in which Juan Nunez can't have that style career and maybe even a little bit better. And you know what? At 46, that's a slot that I think you're getting really great value in. With the 47th pick, I think it's worth taking a risk on the undersized big in Jonathan Mogbo. I love the opportunity that Jonathan Mogbo has to be an elite passer that can run a delay offense. The delay offense is the modern NBA, and it is something that he can do really well with a 2.05 assist to turnover ratio. I also love his elite athleticism, high wingspan, and the fact that he's simply gritty and he's going to go for offensive rebounds and do the little things. Obviously, he can't shoot, he settles for horrible shots, and he's still learning how to use his body, and he is a project. There's a world in which he never works out in the NBA, and it's just going down on the long list of players who are picked in the mid to late 40s that never did anything. But I do think he has the potential to be the type of player that can contribute, especially when you evaluate his defense where he competes. He has an awesome wingspan, is physical in the post, and good in driving line situations. Yes, he's undersized. I don't think he's great in the pick and roll, especially when he's not switching, and he needs to work on his off-ball defense. But these are all things I believe can truly be taught, and I'm going to buy in on his athleticism, wingspan, and just smart decision-making. I think at 47, it's worth this time in the draft to just take a risk on somebody. It's really not that valuable of a pick if you get somebody that could end up developing into a really nice, change of pace big. You're getting a massive steal in a Mogbo, and you even have the upside of him being like a Draymond Green style of play. Obviously, he's not going to be Draymond Green. Draymond Green was put in a perfect system and is much more talented. However, that's the style that Mogbo is going to play with. With the 48th pick, I'm going to go with the length and shooting and overall athleticism of Melvin Ajinça. He's physical, can compete, and at 6'7", I love his size. 68% of all of the shots he took last season were threes, and while he didn't shoot the best percentage, around 33 or 34%, he shot so many and he shot tough threes, and I believe he can develop into a very talented three-point shooter. You just have to get him in a good environment. He's also elite when it comes to coming off of dribble handoffs and off-screen plays, which is exactly what you love to see with an NBA shooter. I think he's pretty much exclusively a straight line driver, and I wouldn't even necessarily give him that. So he can't really put the ball on the floor. He stinks in transition and cannot create his own shot with or without a ball screen, and he doesn't create for others as well. So these are all really big red flags, but when you just go in and you say, hey, I want a standard 3-and-D guy that's a good athlete, I like Ajinça to fill that role. I see no reason why he can't be a 36-37% three-point shooter in the NBA that is going to compete defensively, be switchable, and provide a lot of value. Talking about his defense, he does an awesome job fighting through screens, on and off ball. He's smart in the gaps, and he's good in driving line situations. I like his defense. I think some people would consider Ajinça to be a boring pick because realistically, he's probably going to be at best the 7th or 8th man. But you know what? At 48, if you can get a guy that can even make your roster and contribute even a little bit, you're getting a good value. At 49, I'm going to take a risk and buy in on a project in Justin Edwards. The film of Justin Edwards at Kentucky, to be honest, was quite poor. And honestly, quite poor is an understatement. It was extremely poor. He really was pretty much exclusively an off-ball player who didn't shoot that well. I think he moved well, but his shot was 36% from beyond the arc, which is not bad, but when you consider who he had around him, I would have liked that to be a little bit better, especially given the hype. I think that Edwards is mostly getting drafted based on his EYBL performances and his high school play, because at Kentucky he showcased that he was an awkward finisher who struggled to create for others, settled for mid-range shots, and couldn't do much in transition. When it comes to Justin Edwards' defense, I think there's a little bit of everything. I think his number one strength is the fact that he's a solid driving line defender with good length and active hands. It's a great build to have, and it makes him a really valuable asset. However, he struggles to navigate screens both on and off the ball and has a tendency to cheat. I think there's a very high scenario in which Justin Edwards is out of the NBA in a year or two, but I also think you can't go wrong on that hype, and we could have a GG Jackson situation on our hands, and in that world, at 49, I think it's worth just taking a flyer on Edwards. With the 50th pick, I'm going to go with a shooting wing in Pelle Larsson. And honestly, I really like Pelle Larsson as a player because I like his defense and offense. He's the definition of a 3-and-D guy. He's gritty, does a lot of the little things, and honestly fits the stereotype to a T. I liked watching him at Arizona, and while I did not make a video on Pelle Larsson, I loved what I saw when I watched him in person. When I'm evaluating what I think Pelle Larsson could be in the NBA, I think that more likely than not, he's going to have a role very much so as a shooter that comes off the bench. I don't think that he has that starter upside that even some of the guys like Ajay may have, because Ajay does have great size and frame. Not saying that Larsson doesn't, but I don't think that Larsson has it to that next level. I think Larsson, more likely than not, is going to be a plethora of the really good shooters in the NBA who compete and just fill a role that every single team needs, and you cannot go wrong with that, getting that in the 50s. I think that a lot of people say he's NBA ready, and I agree with them on that take. I think he's versatile, he can switch, he competes, and he does a little bit of everything. Yeah, he's not always going to put the ball on the floor, but I actually think he's better than that than some 3-and-D guys, and I just like him overall as a prospect. He also has a really good vertical leap, which is very exciting. At 51, I'm going to snag Quinten Post, who I am higher on than most players, and here's why I'm higher on him. Firstly, he has a massive build, he sets big screens, he's tall, he's a true 7-footer, and he shot 43% from beyond the arc. Honestly, in my opinion, I think that he is a bigger and stronger Colin Castleton, and Colin Castleton has proven to be an okay two-way piece for the Lakers. I love him as a passer, as he has 99 assists with a positive assist-to-turnover ratio. He's not Jokic, he's not going to be making some obscene passes up and down the court, but I do think he can make simple reads, which is exciting to see. I also love him with his right hand in the post. However, he's not going to be used much as a back-to-the-basket guy because nobody really is now in the NBA. When looking at his offensive weaknesses, I do hate the fact that he struggles to roll and his default is very much to pass. He also struggles to score with his left, and he can't handle the ball or shoot off a drive. Pretty much, you're just getting a pick-and-pop guy with a good frame, and that is his main trait offensively, alongside his simple yet effective reads. When looking at his defensive strengths, I love him in drop coverage. I think he's a really good drop coverage big, good size, decent movement, and a really solid rim protector, and it's everything I like to see in a drop coverage big. However, any other type of pick and roll coverage he struggles with, and he can't switch onto guards, and he's still, once again, while more mobile than he has been in the past, not the fastest guy in the shed. When looking at what I think his career could be like, I do see a world in which he has another key contributor, center off the bench guy role in the NBA, and you're going to bring him in. Let's say you have a more athletic, physical center that's a lob threat. You bring in Quinten Post to go with that finesse, shooting, and continue to still set good screens, and it's everything that you would like. I think at 51, you're getting a really good player. Yes, he's old. Yes, he's from Boston College. Yes, there are red flags, but there are red flags with everyone in this draft, and there are even more red flags with anyone in the late second round. So I'm going to ignore those, and I'm going to snag Quinten Post. With the 52nd pick, I think PJ Hall is a really nice value player. I think PJ Hall is versatile, showcases flashes of being able to run an offense, and he's really good off the ball as a big. However, he still is a back-to-the-basket, undersized big who's not a very good athlete and you can't play drop coverage with. All of these are massive red flags and have me thinking more likely than not he will get washed out of the NBA sooner rather than later. I still think that it is worth taking a flyer on PJ Hall, especially at the end of the second, for a couple of reasons. First of which, he's shown flashes of popping for 3, shooting 4 over 4 threes a game, which is a really high rate. He gets a ton of rebounds despite being small, and he had 18.3 points per game in the ACC. If you're going to score that much, it's worth a shot, especially at this point in the draft. I don't think you can go wrong picking a variety of guys in the 50s, but in my eyes, taking a flyer on someone like PJ Hall, who could develop into a really good backup for you, is something that is worth the risk. At 53, I'm also going to take a flyer on Enrique Freeman. I think Enrique Freeman did not play against the best competition last season. However, I like seeing Freeman's athleticism, lob ability, and showing flashes of being a good rim protector / switcher. I think Freeman can do a lot. However, I also think he has more weight that he has to put on. He's not going to be a one-year project, and he's definitely not going to be a one-year project, and I don't think he will necessarily be ready in 2 years. However, give him time, and maybe he can develop into someone that could even start for you. However, there's also a chance that he just completely never gets there. I'm really not sure. I haven't watched that much film on Freeman, so I am kind of going into him based on just games I saw him play in versus another team or as a teammate of someone else, as well as the combine things that I'm reading and watching. I think Freeman is a solid pick, and when you get him, you're getting someone that could be a nice role player addition. With the 54th pick, I believe that it is worth taking a selection and getting a really good athlete in Kyshawn Johnson. Johnson is definitely a below-the-rim player. However, he shot really well from 3 last season. While his shot doesn't look amazing, you can't ignore 38.7% from 3. I would love him going to a team like the Pacers, who may want to snag Johnson as a cheaper version of Obi Toppin, having that elite athleticism. Johnson is 23 years old, which is a concern for him. However, a lot of people view him as an NBA-ready player because of his recent shooting and athleticism. Even if you don't buy his shooting, I think he's a next-level athlete who can jump out of the gym and has a very high basketball IQ, and I like him defensively, and I think that his upside is worth taking at 54. At 55, I'm taking a flyer on Cam Spencer, and here's why. I think Cam Spencer is extremely intelligent with a 3.54 assist-to-turnover ratio to back it up. His 43.2% shooting and doing a great job coming off of screens are really the cherries on top. While that is true, he really can't do much else as he's not explosive, not a true point guard, does settle, and struggles to create for himself. These are all major red flags, and I also think a lot of scouts are going to discount some of his numbers because he played at UConn, which was a super team. When looking at Cam Spencer defensively, I am quite concerned. I do think he's a team defender who has active hands and knows the personnel, and I think that was shown with his 59 steals. However, he's really poor in the driving line, is bad at navigating screens, and can even overhelp at times. When evaluating what Cam Spencer could be, in my opinion, I actually think he'll probably be washed out of the NBA very quickly, but I think the world that a lot of people see him in is as a backup to probably a 10th man in an NBA rotation that provides really good shooting and is a nice added depth piece. With the 56th pick, I am going to go with a more boring prospect and pick up Jalen Bridges. I think Jalen Bridges is the definition of your very standard 3-and-D player. And a lot of people like that. A lot of people like the idea of plugging him in, knowing that he's going to get his job done, and night in, night out, compete. While this is true, when I watched him this year, I was not that impressed, and I think he has a lot left to work on. In my eyes, I understand the idea and the allure of a 41.2% three-point shooter who also is able to get rebounds and compete, but that's about it. There are so many 3-and-D players in the NBA like this, and I would rather take my chances with some of the higher upside guys I've mentioned earlier, rather than go with a guy like Bridges, who is so easily replaceable, and there are a plethora of players just like him. At 57, I'm going to snag Jalen Wells, who I think has the potential to be a really solid 3-and-D guy in the pros, once again, as I mentioned earlier. I think that his floor is lower than a player such as a Jalen Bridges, but I do believe his ceiling is much higher, as I think he's a pretty good athlete, and at 6'6", I like his game. He shot 41.9% from 3, does a good job off ball, and fights to come off DHOs. When it comes to doing anything else on the basketball court though, he's really not your guy. When it comes to his defense, he's engaged, only giving up 0.545 points per possession in isolation. He makes winning plays and drew numerous charges in the games that I watched, and he has good size. Yes, I think he's average navigating through ball screens and off-ball screens, and he is careless off-ball at times, but I like his game, and I think you're getting someone that you're going to put in the G League for a year, and all of a sudden maybe you have a 7th man out of it, which is a really high ceiling, and maybe even get a fringe starter out of it if everything goes crazy and the stars align. I don't think you're going to get that, but I do think that Jalen Wells is the type of player that has a high enough ceiling to justify drafting him. I will say he needs teams to hit his number in order for him to sign with them, because if they don't, he's just going to ask to go in free agency rather than get drafted at a spot such as 57. With the 58th pick, I'm going to snag Antonio Reeves, and here's why. I get that he's old, I get that there are a lot of red flags in his game, and a lot of people don't buy what his numbers show. But for me, him shooting and scoring as much as he did at Kentucky tells me that he's not afraid of big moments, that he's willing to come in and compete, and that he is an asset to any roster. I loved Antonio Reeves' game at Kentucky, and in watching Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard, I got to get more of a feel as to how Antonio Reeves plays, and I think he makes others better around him. I think that this year was a real jump for him compared to years past, and a lot of people had him written off over previous seasons. However, I'm back on board, and I think that at 58th, which in this draft is actually going to be the last overall pick, you could be getting a really good value player in Antonio Reeves. I see no reason why he is any different than some of the shooters that I just mentioned, and I think Antonio Reeves may even be a better shooter he's even long at times, which is exciting to see. I like Antonio Reeves' game, and I think you're getting a steal. Yes, he can get washed out, but at this point, pretty much anybody can, and I think you're getting a shooter that can be a really nice piece off the bench. With the 59th pick in this draft, which would be undrafted, so my first player that is not going to be selected in this year's draft, for me, is going to be Reese Beekman. I think when I watch Reese Beekman's game, I see a really solid shooter. Yes, he didn't shoot well at Virginia, but he is a good shooter who plays solid defense and is extremely intelligent. I think he does a lot of little things well, and so I like him as a player that can really elevate your team. When you're looking at these types of guys who are maybe some of the first undrafted guys, you're either looking to give your two-way to someone like a Reese Beekman, who is able to contribute, be great on scout team, do the little things, and make the other guys around him better, or you are taking a flyer on an extremely raw, high upside player. I think for me, at 59, I would rather have someone like Reese Beekman that I know is going to make my team, is worth fighting for, and is going to make other guys around him better. I'm not going to hold Virginia's horrible offense against him, and I like Reese Beekman's game, and I think when you watch the film, you will too. With the 60th spot on my big board, and the final player that I'm going to discuss more than just briefly mentioning in this big board is going to be Isaac Jones. I think Isaac Jones has really good size, shows flashes of competing, and is a solid defender. Offensively, I like his game as he can do a lot of things at an okay level. When I watched Jalen Wells, I also noticed Isaac Jones, and I liked his game, and I think he's someone that will probably get a two-way contract. I don't necessarily see him having the longest career in the NBA. I'm not extremely high on him, I'm not extremely low on him, but I think he's the type of guy that's worth a two-way. I haven't watched as much as him as I have for a lot of these guys, so he's definitely going to be on the list of players that I break down after the draft is over. Now, let's get into some honorable mentions, and I'm not going to go too in-depth on them. I'm really just going to read their names in order. So in the first honorable mention spot, I'm going to go with Trey Alexander out of Creighton. Then I like Nafale Dante out of Oregon. I like Isaiah Crawford, Judah Mintz, Tristan Newton, Jesse Edwards, Amel Traore, Bob Carsane, Blake Hinson, and Dylan Jones is going to be rounding out my honorable mentions. I think that the majority of these honorable mention players are going to find a way to snag a two-way in this draft, or if I was a GM, I would assume that they would get so. There are probably one or two other guys, not probably, there are definitely one or two other guys who will also get two-ways, probably more than that are not going to be mentioned on this list. For example, a Zion Pullen style of player. I never spoke about Bronny James. He's going to probably go to the Lakers. So this draft is not a mock draft. It is more a big board evaluating who I like and who I think is going to be talented. Overall, I just want to thank you guys for taking so much time to watch and support this channel. I've had this channel for about 2 months now, and it's really been a treat to be able to watch it grow, develop a community, and have so many wonderful people tune in and support day in and day out. I love basketball. This channel's not going to go away. We're going to have a lot of more fun, in-depth analysis coming after the draft, and I just want to thank you guys for making this a really enjoyable experience.